Hi, it's Diane. I like to go for walks and record what I see in my nature journal. I've just spent a week in the Isle of Skye in Scotland with a friend, and during that time I created a sketchbook. I want to share with you the whole process of how I create a nature journal in the space of 2 weeks. Most sketchbooks are ready-made with a certain number of pages and the paper already chosen. The way I make my sketchbooks is to choose my own paper, create the pages. When I've finished the paintings that I'm going to do, I discard the blank pages I'm not going to use and bind it all together. So in other words, I'm creating the pages first and then creating the sketchbook. This upside down approach means I can create a whole journal. After a week away somewhere, I can create a whole book or pamphlet of the whole experience. And this is what I'm going to share with you. And it's a lot lighter to carry when you're doing long walks. You just need to take the paper and something to rest on, as well as your selected art supplies. I'm also going to show the method and materials I use to create the paintings. First of all, let's look at the paper I chose to take with me. I like to use smooth hot pressed watercolour paper that's fairly thick. This is 300 GSM. I carry this watercolour paper loose, cut to size and folded to fit in this notebook cover. You can use any cover, any size, whatever fits in your bag. This is light to carry, much cheaper to make than buying a sketchbook, and it's the size and type of paper that I want. Let's look at my art kit. I tend to vary the art materials I take with me, just to experiment with different media. For this trip to the Isle of Skye, I took watercolours. I needed to take a kit that was very light to carry, and this is how I reduced it down to a small kit. I've got this larger watercolour set, and I bought an empty watercolour container with empty pans in it, which meant I could choose which colours I wanted to take with me. So I chose a selection of watercolours, and I also filled some of the pans with gouache and let it dry. I wanted to experiment with some of the colours, so I took this very bright green, but I also took some more neutral colours. I wanted to capture the vibrancy of the plants and some of the birds and the landscapes I knew I was going to be seeing. I even used up some paint that had dried out. I managed to take it out of the tube and put it into the empty pans. I used this watercolour medium to water it down a bit. I added a few drops and then stirred it in. This was quite a messy process, but I ended up taking one with me. And this is a great way to use up paints that have dried up in the tube. The other thing I did was to swatch all the colours on a small piece of watercolour paper that I fitted into the kit, and this gave me an idea of what the colours looked like on the paper. And here is a list of all the colours and all the art materials I took with me. I also used another piece of watercolour paper to swatch all the other materials I'd taken with me. So I'd taken this water brush with acrylic ink in it in the colour of Payne's Grey, because I thought I'd be doing some paintings without colour, just some tonal sketches. But I ended up not doing that in the end. I enjoyed using the watercolour so much that all my paintings ended up being colour. I carried the paper in this folder and I put my whole kit into a plastic bag. When you're out and about in the Scottish Islands, you will need something waterproof. I'm going to go through how I did my paintings in the next section of this video, but for now I'm just showing you what I took with me. But while I was in Skye, I found this lovely shop that sold batik, and they sold these really large pencil cases, so I thought that'd be perfect for my art kit, and I managed to fit everything in. Even the watercolour set fitted in one of the pockets. I did do some of the paintings on location outside for this nature journal, but for some of them I took a photograph and finished it afterwards. So what I'm showing you here is how I created each scene. I didn't copy the photographs exactly. What I did was take features from all of the photographs I'd taken and put them all together on one spread. So at the front I did all the flowers, and then in the background I did a scene of Portree. Skye is quite a hilly, mountainous island in the far north of Scotland. It's a beautiful place with quite a dramatic landscape, and I wanted to capture the landscapes as well as some of the plants and flowers. After I looked through all my photographs and decided what I wanted to include on the page, I drew it all out in pencil, then went over the top with this black fine liner pen. I added the names of the plants with a thicker pen and then erased all the pencil lines. It was ready to add the watercolour on top. These fine liner pens are waterproof. When you add the watercolour on top, they don't reactivate, they just stay as they are. And I used this style throughout the nature journal. I took this spray bottle with me to spray on the watercolours, and I mostly used this water brush to add the watercolours to my paintings. I just took the one water brush and it seemed to be good for everything. So here I'm adding in the sky and the water. As you go up on this walk, you can see down into the harbour, and it's quite an amazing view. I took photographs and videos at different points of the walk. It was very useful to create my sketches afterwards. Just to prove, we have made it up the side of the hill. I call it a nature journal because I'm recording lots of the plants and birds and insects, but I'm also adding text and labelling things, so it's not just sketches. I'm going to show the whole sketchbook in another video. I did a few sketches on location, but most of the time I created them as I've shown here. I would take the photos and use a plant identifier to find out what they are. Also, just to say that Google is often wrong with identification, and I ended up looking at several sources to try and find what the plants actually were. I'm a beginner to nature journaling, and the reason I do a nature journal is to educate myself. But if you notice any mistakes with how I've identified these plants, please let me know. After I'd added all the watercolour and let it dry, for the final stage I used this white gel pen just to add in some highlights, and this seemed to work quite well. And I also went over anything that needed a darker tone with the black pen. After completing all the paintings on loose pieces of paper, the next stage is to bind it all together, and that's what I'm going to show you next. I have spent a lot of time searching for the right sketchbook, one that is just the right size with the right paper, but I've never found it. This is one of the reasons why I make my own. After all the pages were completed, it was time to bind them all together to create the nature journal. You can see there was one sheet of paper I didn't use, so I removed that one before creating the cover. The cover is made from packaging. I often recycle materials for my sketchbook. It makes it much more affordable and fun to make. I measured it and cut it to size to fit around the pages. After I clamp the pages together, I mark and pierce 3 holes with a brad awl on a cutting mat. I sometimes use different size pages in my sketchbooks, but it's okay to do that as long as the thread goes through all of the pages. You can see here that I've made the holes to fit the shortest piece of paper. The string needs to be strong and about 3 to 4 times the width of the journal. Thread the string onto a needle with a large eye. Bring the needle up from the outside through the middle hole. Take it to the top and through the top hole. Take it down to the bottom hole and back to the inside. And through the middle again. Tie the 2 ends on the outside. Take off the clips and make sure you're happy with the journal when it's folded. You may need to tighten the thread a bit. I used the blank page to glue on the inside of the cover. And I created a contents page and also a list of art materials that I used. I used the swatch that I'd taken with me in the watercolours to add to my journal, and now I've got a record of all the colours that I used and all my art materials. I treat my journals as if they are small books, and therefore they need a cover as well as a contents page. For this cover I used white gesso, then black gesso to paint 2 squares. The decoration on the cover was created using acrylic paint and Posca pens. You can decorate the cover with whatever you choose. You could use stickers, you could stick photographs on there, you could just write the name of your journal. It's whatever you want it to be. And it makes it much more personal than a bought sketchbook. The design of this cover changed as I went along. I didn't have a set plan. I added the lettering in black and white paint. I outlined some features of the landscape of Skye, such as these houses, with the black Posca pen. These pens are great. They are a type of acrylic paint, and it makes it really easy to draw a design on the cover, but of course you could just use whatever you like. I'm going to show the rest of the journal in another video, so please join me there.